what I'd like to talk to you about is related to global governance, but not very directly. The UK has been racked by the scandal at the LSE relating to the donations from the Gaddafi Foundation. Now, it was the Centre for Global Governance at the LSE that was involved in this. You have your PhD from LSE. You're involved in this world. Sort of rising above the academic politics, the nasty academic politics that's going on, I think is the wider question of what is the role of the university, this kind of rather ancient, old-fashioned institution, in a world, in a globalized, competitive world in which its place is no longer so certain. How should the university be behaving towards those in power?
Well, there's that old saying from Henry Kissinger that academic debates are so furious because the stakes are so small. And I think that this issue obviously takes that to a whole other level. I mean, clearly, it's not the amount of money that's at issue here, because in the grand scheme of things, £1 million is not exactly a tremendous amount of capital, either to have taken as a gift or as support for research, which in fact it was, by the LSE, and certainly not compared to the volume of, let's say, arms expenditures and sales between the UK government and Libya or other Western governments in Libya. I think that very often the tendency is to beat up on the actor that is most accessible and most harmless and most defenseless. Because of course, what good does protesting your government do when they don't change policies? But of course, when you can just show up, and trash the LSE, of course, you can score those points. So I think that that's one part of the dynamic that's going on here. This is very much a society that scapegoats, and maybe other publics are like that as well. But the tabloid mob rule that has really characterized this particular issue has been quite a shock, I think, to a lot of people, most certainly to the LSE itself and its faculty and so on. But getting to the broader question of the role of the university, my very, very firm belief is that the role of the university is as an authority in the realm of education. And I believe that the term authority is very important, because in the Middle Ages, which is a period that I write about in my new book, universities did in fact enjoy the rights of legation. They participated in diplomacy. They were viewed as educational authorities. This was an age before territorial sovereignty in the Westphalian sense of the term, and a university was respected in that way. And a university's role, and the first major universities of history were founded during that period: Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and so on. And so those are places where people from around the world, whoever has the means, the accessibility to those places, are able to go for an education. A university's primary function then is very much to educate whomever it comes through its doors, whoever that may be. And I believe that in this instance, with respect to Libya, I think the LSE was doing that. When an opportunity was created through multilateral diplomacy, particularly that of the United States, the United Kingdom, with the Libyan government in the early part of last decade, and Muammar Gaddafi agreed to give up his nuclear program, and a variety of opportunities were created for European businesses, for energy companies, and also for the university to play a role in this broader process of thawing or engaging with Libya. And that is very much how the entire world viewed that situation at the time. In fact, it was viewed extremely positively, an example of using diplomacy to bring a rogue state in from the cold. A very small component of that broader engagement was to offer student places to Libyan students, even an offer to take Libyan government officials and others and train them in English language, international law, and other kinds of things. My belief is that teaching people these things, whatever country they may come from, is an important function of a university, and it's their true mission. It is, in fact, their moral obligation to do that. So I support the LSE in what it did in terms of being engaged with individual Libyans for the purpose of educating them. Most certainly, I don't view anyone at the LSE as being personally responsible for what has happened in Libya in the last several years. If universities had anything like that kind of power, they would be governments in their own right, and that they are certainly not. I personally also believe that the LSE really, if it had defended itself against the sort of tabloids more firmly, it would not have been on the back foot as it should have been. I firmly believe that engagement is very important in diplomacy. The absence of engagement is more or less the absence of diplomacy. And so universities, can play an important role and did play an important role. Leaving aside, of course, the fact that so many universities engage with so many countries, each of which could be considered dubious in their own right for any wide set of reasons. Who is really playing moral arbiter here? The two principles that I subscribe to are engagement and education, and I think that those were applied properly by the LSE in this case.
So can I just press you on this question? I think you rightly underline the importance of authority to the university, that in a sense is the university's asset, is its authority. Do you think that there are any relationships, not of education, which I'd completely agree with you, but of taking money, which might undermine that authority? I mean, at the time, within the faculty at the LSE, within the experts on the Middle East, there was intense debate about precisely this question, about which regimes was it okay to take money from and which was it not. And there was a very forceful case made by Professor Fred Halliday that there's a real difference between Gaddafi's regime and, let's say, the regimes of the Emirates or the Saudi Arabia or of Kuwait. And he used the distinction that rules draws between rather unfortunately feudal but nevertheless legitimate governments and states that use violence systematically in order to rule. Is there a problem of, is there anyone that you can't take money from if you're worried about your authority?
Well, the way you're articulating, you're making a very arbitrary distinction between legitimacy and acceptability. You're almost using the terms as interchangeable, and you're making a very subjective decision or qualification that could be made by anyone in a real-time basis, analyzing any regime based on their own opinion at any point in time. So I would say that if you want to create some kind of universal rule, it shouldn't be built on the case that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are okay, but Libya is not. That's very wobbly ground for anyone to be standing on. The more appropriate distinction, I think, is whether or not whoever the donor may be, and in the United States one faces this issue not from outlaw regimes that are giving money, but in fact from individuals who have a very liberal academic agenda and seek to shape things. But the universities in the United States simply say, we will take money from whoever it may be, but never will there be any infringement on the university's academic authority to determine how that funding is used. So in that sense, whether it is Libya or whether it is Saudi Arabia, the key question is not who it is and what your subjective judgment is of their moral virtue, but rather, is there any control being exercised from the outside on your right to deploy those funds in order to advance learning in the way that university should do? That was the case with the LSE, with the Libyan funding. In no way, shape, or form was the spending dictated by the Gaddafi regime, and I think that's a very important thing. The funding was used and recycled into a program that did research on democracy and other types of social issues as they relate to North Africa. That can only be a good thing to have conducted that research.
So for example, naming a room the Gaddafi room does not confer some kind of signal of approval to the regime.
I don't know anything about naming of rooms after.
But as an example, right. I mean, would that be? I mean, all I'm getting at is the fact that actually accepting money is itself a signal of a certain endorsement.
Accepting money is an endorsement of whatever the money is being used for. And if Gaddafi is giving money and approving that money be used for funding of academic research on civil society and democracy in North Africa, to me that's a valid use of that money from any university, LSE or otherwise. Naming a room after someone means that you are taking that those funds are being directed towards a purpose that may not be the academic desire of the university. So that might be rather questionable. I would make a firm distinction between naming a room after someone and using the money to fund scholarships, which is what the LSE has ultimately decided to do.
So would it be fair to say that you have a sort of Henry VIII view, as it were, of the role of the university, which in a sense is to say, well, yes, money does come in rather terrible ways sometimes. Henry VIII sacked the monasteries and became wealthy that way and founded a good number of Oxford and Cambridge colleges on the back of it. And in fact, if some good comes of those terrible actions of those in power, let it be?
Well, I think you may have the roles reversed because, of course, the universities aren't themselves those that are doing the plundering right now. They may be the beneficiaries of gifts, but again, to the extent that you view universities as the credible intellectual authority that should be arbitrating over how certain monies, not all money, is spent, I think that we have to, defer to them in this regard. And, I don't view them, again, as agents of plunder.
Parag Khanna, thank you very much. As I say, you have a new book coming out, How to Run the World. Very interesting talking to you as ever. Thank you.
Thank you.